Hello again, everyone, and welcome to my frantically pointing finger, apparently. No, this is an impressionist experiment, a little bit of an acrylic experiment that I decided to do when I was trying to paint a little more minimally, a little more expressively, a little less realistically, I suppose, than what I normally have. And these are my first sketches of little windsurfers before I decided which one I wanted to paint. And I chose this guy who was leaping out of the water to be part of my painting, and I'm just right now recreating that little sketch over here on my tiny piece of, what is this? It's not paper. It's like a canvas textured paper. I'm not exactly sure what it is. It was like a little notebook that was full of canvas textured paper. But anyway, I'm starting out here by wetting my paper, my little piece of canvas down, so that my paint doesn't dry quite so fast. That's one of the things about acrylics, is your paint dries so fast. And I wanted a really subtle fade. I wanted a nice fade for this sky here in the background. So I started out with a layer of white on the top. And then I just added a few smears of color into my white paint and then blended that down to create this lovely soft wash that I've got going right here. Now I've moved my canvas a little bit so you can actually see it. I had it a little too far down earlier on. And now it looks like I'm just mixing up some colors for my water. I did the same thing here as I did at the top of the sky. I started with a white base, and now I'm just adding in some contrasting colors, some darker blues, and blending that in. And then I'm just picking out little places where I see darker bits in the water. You'll be able to see this reference photo. I'll put a link in the description, and I'll put this reference photo somewhere on my website. I'm actually working on a real-time, full-length tutorial with this windsurfer because I thought it was a pretty easy piece to put together. And I think it'd be a good thing to try if you're new to acrylics. This little windsurfer. So I'm making a full-length tutorial that'll be available on my website when it comes up, but this is the sped up version. I'm putting in these little mountains in the background, you'll see in the picture. And now I'm just adding in some more contrast to my waves. Water, I found with water you really need to go back and forth with your lights and your darks and your midtones, and it takes a little finesse to get that ever-changing texture that water has. And it looks like now I'm just adding in some cloud textures here in my background. So far I've just been painting the background mostly, nothing in my main, up there I'm starting with my main figure, except for this window. There's a clear window in the sail itself that you could see the sky through. That was the only thing I'd put down so far. It's very strange starting with such a dark black. It's not completely black. There's some blue and some red in there because it needed to be a warmer tone. There's the sail. I'm doing the same thing with the sail as I did in the sky. I'm starting with a white base and I am streaking just a little bit of red. I put a little bit of red on the very tip of my brush and I'm just streaking a couple different shades of red through this sail where I see them to create that sort of nice brush effect that I really enjoyed. I love that brush effect. I'm going to have to do that some more in the future. Now this is my first layer, my complete first layer, which I've let dry, walked away and let dry. Now we're coming back for our second layer. I like to put a first layer of simple colors, just color blocking where I want colors to go, before I come back in with a second layer of a little more detail. Here I'm sort of softening up those mountains in the background and adding in some more cloud textures. It was a nice fade I had going to start with, but I didn't want it to be a perfectly solid fade. There's some floofy clouds in the distance here that I wanted to make sure to represent. Just some textures, just some cool textures that I'm adding in here. because those mountains were so misty in the background. I didn't want them to be too easy to see, so I blended them into the sky a little bit more. Sorry about my head in so many of these shots. As we get into more of the detail work, you'll see my head pop up a little bit more. I have very poor eyesight, and I end up crouched very close to the piece I'm working on when I start putting in little details. So I guess just watch out for giant hair monsters in the bottom of your screen. Oh, now I'm putting in some of the splatter. I've been just going back and forth, adding in some darker colors and adding in some lighter colors till I get a sort of a wave look that I'm going for. But now I'm starting to work up into this surf, this bit of splash that is coming out of the water. This is where the windsurfer has launched herself. The picture, I don't know that the picture, my reference photo, was a woman in the reference photo, but my painting, I think, ended up being a lady doing her windsurfing. So that's how I refer to her, as a her, but really you can see whoever you want in the windsurfer. That's the beauty of Impressionism. You can see whatever you want if you look at it in the right angle. But now I'm starting on this surf. And a little counterintuitively, there are actually a lot of dark colors in this spray of water, in this splash of water. And that's because it's such a bright sky in the background. You see sort of the water blocks the light in such a way that some of the splash is actually quite dark. And you see a lot of different colors. If you look very closely, you'll see oranges and reds, of course, because of the sky, but also purples and blues. I assume the purples that I see were a combination of the blues of the water and the orange of the sky just mixing together. So you see some sort of dusky gray purples and some very dark oranges, as you see me putting in right there. Very little pure white. I always try and hold back with the pure white until toward the end of the piece, because usually there's such a very small amount of pure white. And even this right here that you're seeing me put in isn't actually a pure white. It's actually a very pale blue, I think, is what I ended up putting in right here. Just add in some more surf along these waves here where the water's breaking against each other. I struggle with water sometimes. I don't have a lot of experience on the open water, so it's never been my easiest subject. A lot of color mixing in this one, but some pretty simple colors though. Nothing overly complex. It was a very simple color palette. Some blues and oranges. That's the fun part, the splattering. Added a little bit of water in with my paints, my colors here, and I gave it a couple of just splatters with my fingertip on the brush, drawing back the bristles and releasing them onto the canvas. And I did that with a few colors, some oranges, some darker oranges, some whites, some blues, just to sort of give that spray effect, spray of water. Oh, looks like I'm starting work on that figure now. Must be nearing the end. I almost forgot to add that board there, where you can see it in the window of her sail. She's crouched there in such a dynamic position. I didn't want to spend too much time, there's my head again. I didn't want to spend too much time making her figure incredibly realistic. I really wanted to spend more time creating the effect of motion. I wanted to capture like the moment that she's launching herself out of the water, but I could have spent more time on her figure, I suppose. There's her little face. I love her little face for some reason. I'll show you a close-up shot here at the end of the video, but her face is just so beautifully vague. I've done a couple of portraits, and a lot of that is very fine detail work and very subtle shading. But for this one, her face is so vague that I kind of am in love with it. I'm in love with her vague face. But now I'm just adding in some grays mostly. It looks like I'm adding in some color variations on the board and some color variations on the suit where the sun will catch the edge of her wetsuit. Because it's not a solid black. Even with something like a wetsuit that's a solid black piece of clothing, it's not going to appear solid black in your picture when you're painting it. There's some warm highlights where the sun hits, and there's some cooler shadows where it's the darkest, where she's facing away from the light. Don't forget her hair. All of these elements need their own highlights and lowlights, contrasting values. I got that bar kind of wonky, to be honest, but that bar she's holding on to, but you know, it's part of the motion of the piece. I'll maintain. Now I'm adding in these straps. I'm not completely familiar with how a sail like this is built, how a windsurfing apparatus is put together, but it has these thicker areas of cloth that I was representing here that I assume are sewn on seams to create the shape of the sail. And her little foot is another piece that I really liked, where her little foot is bent, touching the board. Such little variations of shadow can really create a shape, just some different colors. There you see I'm adding in some highlights on her wetsuit. Nice dark gray highlight. It's subtle in your black tones, the highlights and the lowlights, but they're there. You can't skimp out on them. Looks like we're almost to my favorite part now, these last bright red streaks. Man, I love that. That really makes that sail pop. But all those tones underneath that are important too. All that tone underneath that is important, or else those bright red highlights wouldn't stand out like they do. You guys are going to be so familiar with the top of my head. They're making sure that there's a nice delineation between her neck and the wetsuit. You don't want that to blend into each other too much. And it looks like we're finished. Look, there she is, jumping out of the water. That's a great piece. You see, there's that close-up of her figure I was showing. Do you see her face? I love her beautiful, subtle face. And you see the back of her foot in that dark shadow? It's lovely. I really enjoyed this experiment with some more minimalistic brushstrokes to convey my purpose, I suppose. And I recommend it really to anyone who wants to play with acrylic paints to try this more simple style, this more expressive style. It was a lot of fun. And if you want the full-length tutorial, I guess subscribe to my website. Give me your email address, sign up for the newsletter, and I'll let you know when the full-length video is out. Anyway, thank you for coming by. Thank you for showing up to this video with me, and I hope you enjoyed it. Goodbye.